right now, the United States is deploying these massive multi-billion-dollar aircraft carrier strike groups to the Middle East. And the explicit purpose is defending a core ally.
Right, it's a huge projection of force.
Exactly. It's visible to the entire world. But at the exact same moment, behind closed doors, the President of the United States is actively hiding the identities of his own diplomatic envoys from that very same ally.
Which is just wild to think about.
It really is. He's terrified that if their names get out, they're going to be assassinated. So, welcome to the new era of coalition warfare, where the lines between, partner and target have just completely dissolved.
Yeah, it's a profound paradox, honestly. I mean, we're witnessing a situation where the public theater of military deterrence is, well, it's completely at odds with the clandestine reality of this shadow diplomacy. The traditional models we use to understand international relations, like this idea of unified alliances moving in lockstep against a common enemy, they simply do not apply to the mechanics of what's happening on the ground right now.
And deciphering those mechanics is exactly our mission for you today. I'm your host, and joined by our resident expert, we are doing a custom deep dive into a highly complex, frankly mind-bending conversation between political commentator Mario Nawfal and military analyst Lieutenant Colonel Karen Kwiatkowski.
It's a dense conversation, to say the least.
Absolutely. Our objective here is to look way beyond the surface-level headlines and decode this multi-layered, real-time chess match that's currently unfolding between the U.S., Iran, and Israel.
But before we begin unpacking this, we really need to be explicitly clear with you, the listener.
Yeah, good point.
The analysis we are exploring today is drawn from source material that contains highly charged political and military opinions. I mean, it touches on active conflicts, incredibly sensitive international alliances, and, well, deeply controversial tactical assessments.
That is a really critical baseline to establish. Our goal here is absolutely not to take a side. We are not endorsing any specific political figure, and we are certainly not validating any military strategy or geopolitical doctrine. Our job is just to impartially explore the fascinating theories, the logistical realities, and the factual claims presented in this specific source material.
We just want to break down the underlying system so you can understand the arguments being made.
Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine you are watching a high-stakes poker game, but half the players are texting each other under the table, and the chips they are betting with are actually the global energy supply.
That's a great way to picture it.
Right. And some are trying to set the table on fire, and the dealer's running out of money. That is the operational environment Nawfal and Kwiatkowski are describing.
To understand the sheer velocity of this crisis, you really have to look at the timeline the analysis establishes right out of the gate. It begins with a stark ultimatum from Donald Trump. According to the breakdown, Trump sets a hard deadline, which, at the moment of their recording, was a mere 10 hours away. And the demand was unambiguous. Iran must guarantee the Strait of Hormuz remains open.
And the threat attached to that demand was catastrophic. If that deadline passed without compliance, the U.S. stated it would initiate direct kinetic strikes against Iranian energy infrastructure.
And their domestic power grids.
Yeah, power grids. Just massive escalation.
The implications of executing that threat are staggering. I mean, the analysis points out that Iran operates on a strict doctrine of tit-for-tat retaliation.
It's always symmetrical.
Exactly. They have telegraphed, both historically and in the immediate lead-up to this ultimatum, that any kinetic strike on their sovereign energy grid will be met with a symmetrical strike on the energy infrastructure of the U.S. allied Gulf states.
And this is not just theoretical posturing, right?
No, not at all. The material notes a recent highly successful Iranian strike on a regional gas field that was executed within hours of a perceived provocation. They possess the precision-guided munitions to do it, and they've established the operational precedent.
Let's pause and map out what that actually means for the global system, because we aren't just talking about, a couple of oil derricks catching fire.
Far from it.
You are talking about the potential destruction of desalination plants, massive export terminals, and these highly exposed pipeline networks in the Persian Gulf. Nawfal actually notes consulting with an economist who described the potential fallout as just unfathomable.
Unfathomable is the right word.
Our entire global economy operates on a just-in-time energy delivery system. If the Gulf's infrastructure goes offline abruptly, you trigger an immediate apocalyptic shockwave through the global energy market.
Which brings us to the sudden, jarring pivot. So with the deadline looming and global markets bracing for impact, a cryptic social media post from Trump completely upends the board.
Yeah, he just tweets it out.
Right. He announces that due to ongoing, undisclosed negotiations with Iran, he is delaying the military deadline by 5 days.
The collective sigh of relief from the market is immediate. Nawfal even describes getting off a flight, seeing the delay, and feeling ecstatic that the world basically just bought 5 days of breathing room.
But that relief evaporates almost instantly.
Because of the denial.
Exactly. Iran officially releases a statement flatly denying that any negotiations are taking place.
This is where the mechanics of shadow diplomacy become incredibly complex, because almost immediately after Iran issues its official denial, regional intelligence reports start leaking.
Yeah, the leaks start pouring in.
The analysis details claims that the head of the Iranian parliament is actually the point person for these back-channel talks, and that these highly classified meetings are physically taking place in Pakistan.
Utilizing Pakistan as a neutral third-party ground, yeah.
Hold on, let me stop you there, because the whiplash here is absurd. If we take these conflicting reports at face value, it feels like a massive group text, where half the people have their read receipts turned off.
That's a perfect analogy.
You have the U.S. president publicly claiming talks are happening. Then, the very Iranian official supposedly leading those talks comes out publicly and calls the reports fake news. But then, just hours later, Al Jazeera reports that a senior Iranian official confirmed the talks did actually happen.
It's dizzying.
How do you even begin to negotiate when the other side won't publicly admit they're in the room?
Well, you have to view public statements during a kinetic conflict, not as transmissions of objective truth, but as multi-directional signaling mechanisms.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
When you are navigating statecraft at this level, every single press release is engineered to satisfy competing audiences simultaneously.
Right.
When Iran officially denies the talks, they are signaling strength to their domestic hardliners and their regional proxy forces. They're assuring them that they aren't capitulating to U.S. ultimatums.
But then the leak tells a different story.
Exactly. When a senior official strategically leaks a confirmation to Al Jazeera, they are signaling to global financial markets and to the diplomatic back channels in Washington that the off-ramp is still viable. I mean, plausible deniability is the currency of back-channel diplomacy.
So the contradiction isn't an accident, it's the actual strategy.
Precisely.
Nawfal theorizes that we are watching a massive, real-time power struggle fracture the Iranian government from the inside out. He breaks it down into two distinct camps. On one side, you have the executive branch, which he characterizes as pragmatic.
The bureaucrats, essentially.
Right, bureaucrats and politicians who understand the devastating economic toll of a direct war with the U.S., and they are actively seeking a negotiated settlement.
And on the opposing side, you have the ideological core of the regime, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC.
And they are not just a typical military branch.
No, the analysis emphasizes that the IRGC is a sprawling, deeply entrenched military-industrial conglomerate. I mean, they control massive sectors of the Iranian economy. Their allegiance bypasses the executive branch entirely and flows directly to the supreme leader. The material notes they are operating with a profound sense of grievance and a survivalist mentality, especially following the targeted assassinations of their previous leadership. They are fundamentally resistant to compromise.
And the physical evidence for this internal war is undeniable. The analysis points out that the moment Trump announced his 5-day delay to foster these supposed peace talks, the IRGC immediately launched a barrage of ballistic missiles.
Talk about a rejection.
Right. They used a kinetic strike as a veto. They were essentially firing rockets over the heads of their own pragmatic diplomats, signaling to the world that regardless of what is being whispered in Pakistan, the military wing intends to keep the Strait of Hormuz closed.
It perfectly illustrates the friction of a divided state apparatus. However, Kwiatkowski introduces a structural counterargument that challenges the viability of these negotiations entirely, regardless of which Iranian faction is at the table.
This part blew my mind.
Her skepticism is rooted deeply in the specific personnel the United States has chosen to deploy as negotiators.
Right, because Trump publicly confirmed that the two men handling this unbelievably delicate, multivariable nuclear and military standoff are Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner.
And the analysis focuses heavily on the backgrounds of these two individuals. Neither possesses a traditional diplomatic pedigree.
Not at all.
They lack advanced military operational experience, and they have absolutely zero technical background in nuclear physics, in rich uranium centrifuges, or, the mechanics of international arms control treaties.
So what is their expertise?
Their professional expertise is entirely concentrated in commercial real estate development and sovereign wealth fund investments, specifically within the Gulf states.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The source compares sending these specific negotiators to sending a fourth grader to do a PhD-level MIT science experiment. It's like trying to defuse a bomb with a real estate broker. It changes the entire dynamic of what a peace deal even looks like.
What's fascinating here is how the deliberate selection of non-traditional envoys telegraphs the ultimate strategic objective of the administration.
How so?
Well, when a state deploys seasoned diplomats, arms control experts, and IAEA-trained physicists to a summit, it signals the desire to construct a verifiable technical treaty bound by international law.
Which makes sense for a nuclear standoff.
But when you deploy real estate executives and investment bankers, you are signaling the desire for a highly transactional, financially motivated business arrangement.
Ah.
The parameters of the negotiation shift instantly from what are the verification mechanisms for your nuclear enrichment facilities to what is the bottom line financial cost required to halt hostilities.
But Kwiatkowski argues that this transactional approach creates an insurmountable credibility deficit. I mean, the analysis points out that these specific negotiators are perceived regionally as possessing an overt structural bias toward Israel.
Very much so.
From the Iranian perspective, whether you are talking to the pragmatic executive branch or the hardline IRGC, why would you commit to binding security concessions with envoys you view as fundamentally compromised?
Yeah.
Especially guys who are technically illiterate regarding your core defense infrastructure.
She draws a direct parallel to the broader geopolitical positioning of the United States, actually citing the dynamic in Eastern Europe.
Okay, tracking.
The argument is that you cannot credibly position yourself as a neutral, mediating arbiter of peace while simultaneously acting as the primary logistical and financial benefactor for one of the active combatants. The inherent contradiction destroys the trust required for sustainable diplomacy.
So you have a fractured Iranian leadership structure trying to navigate back channels with U.S. envoys they view as unqualified and biased.
It's a mess.
But the structural integrity of this entire negotiation falls apart even further when you look at the absolute peak of the Iranian hierarchy. There is a literal ghost at the top of the chain of command.
The material delves into the profound ambiguity surrounding the current status of the Iranian supreme leader. Specifically, it focuses on reports concerning Mojtaba Khamenei.
That's the son of the current supreme leader, right?
Yes, and he wields immense power. But there is a glaring, unexplained absence of recent public appearances or verifiable proof of life from him.
The conversation highlights intelligence suggesting he was targeted in a previous kinetic strike, and the strike reportedly failed to eliminate him but left him severely injured, forcing him into deep operational cover.
Which is a massive problem for negotiations.
Exactly. If the ultimate singular authority in a theocratic military structure is incapacitated or effectively cut off from daily command and control due to security protocols, it acts as an accelerant for the factional infighting we just discussed. Who actually has the authority to sign a peace deal?
That internal Iranian vacuum collides with what is arguably the most staggering revelation regarding the U.S. posture.
Oh man, this part.
The analysis examines a press exchange where Donald Trump is explicitly pressed by reporters to name the specific Iranian counterpart that his team Witkoff and Kushner are communicating with.
Right.
Trump acknowledges they are speaking to a top person, but he absolutely refuses to disclose the individual's identity.
And the rationale he provides is what makes you stop in your tracks. He stated directly, I don't want him to be killed.
We need to analytically deconstruct the gravity of that admission.
Please do.
The Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Armed Forces is publicly conceding that the operational security surrounding his diplomatic back channels is dictated by the fear of imminent assassination. And, based on Kwiatkowski's interpretation of the intelligence landscape, the entity Trump is hiding this negotiator from is not a rogue terror cell or an Iranian hardline faction.
No.
He is hiding them from Israeli intelligence.
Wait, hold on. So what does this all mean for you as an observer? The U.S. is trying to broker a deal, but they have to hide their contacts from their own ally to keep them alive. That completely redefines the concept of a coalition. How does the situation evolve where the U.S. believes its own ally is actively hunting its diplomatic contacts?
Well, Kwiatkowski frames this by explaining a specific, decentralized operational doctrine utilized by Israeli military intelligence. She refers to it as a targeted fatwa, or an assassination mandate.
Okay.
According to this framework, the highest echelons of Israeli leadership have essentially pre-authorized field operatives and strike coordinators to eliminate any identified high-ranking Iranian political or military figure on site.
So it's not a system where an operative spots a target, radios back to headquarters, waits for a committee to convene, and gets a green light from the prime minister.
Exactly the opposite. It is a doctrine of decentralized mission command. The authority to execute the strike is pushed down to the tactical level. If the target is positively identified and the operational window exists, the operative is pre-authorized to take the shot without routing the request back up a bureaucratic chain of command. I mean, it is designed for maximum lethality and speed in a highly fluid battle space.
So think about the logistical and diplomatic nightmare this creates. The U.S. State Department and intelligence agencies have to actively compartmentalize and conceal their own vital diplomatic assets from Mossad and the IDF.
It's unprecedented.
It fundamentally redefines the architecture of an alliance. It exposes a structural reality where the U.S. and its primary regional ally possess mutually exclusive strategic objectives.
It really highlights a severe divergence in end-state goals.
Right.
The analysis suggests the U.S. is desperately attempting to construct an off-ramp to avoid a regional conflagration.
Right.
Conversely, the Allied perspective might view the continuation of the conflict as a strategic necessity to permanently degrade Iranian capabilities. If the ally eliminates the pragmatic Iranian negotiator, the diplomatic bridge is destroyed, the war inevitably escalates, and the U.S. is forced to remain militarily engaged.
Hence the secrecy.
Therefore, the U.S. must actively shield the architects of peace from its own coalition partners.
It is just a breathtaking level of geopolitical dysfunction, but it forces us to ask the foundational question driving this entire deep dive. Like, why is the U.S. so desperate to find this off-ramp?
That's the billion-dollar question.
The traditional narrative tells us the U.S. possesses overwhelming, unassailable global hegemony. Why the sudden, frantic push for a transactional settlement? According to the analysis, the answer has absolutely nothing to do with nuclear non-proliferation treaties or human rights.
No, it is entirely about the math.
Exactly. We're moving from the kinetic battlefield to the financial one.
Kwiatkowski's assessment is stark here. The wavering U.S. commitment to this military theater is driven by domestic economic gravity.
It always comes back to the economy.
Always. She asserts that the administration's primary calculus is not focused on the yield of an Iranian centrifuge, but on the trajectory of U.S. stock portfolios, the stability of financial backers, and, crucially, the politically lethal rise in domestic gas prices. The war is simply becoming too expensive for the electorate to absorb.
But the analysis goes far deeper than just the price at the pump. It points to a macroeconomic tectonic shift that threatens the very foundation of American power.
Yeah, the currency issue.
The material highlights a specific paradigm-shifting event. A Japanese commercial vessel was forced to pay a transit fine to Iranian authorities to secure passage through the Strait of Hormuz. But the critical, system-altering detail is the currency utilized for the transaction.
The fine was paid in Chinese yuan.
Let me make sure the sheer scale of this is clear. You have Japan, a cornerstone Western ally, paying an adversarial state to transit a global choke point, utilizing the currency of America's primary geopolitical rival.
To understand why that is a geopolitical earthquake, we have to briefly look at the mechanics of the petrodollar system.
Break that down.
Since the geopolitical agreements forged in the 1970s, the global trade of hydrocarbons, so oil and natural gas, has been almost exclusively denominated in U.S. dollars. This forces every central bank and major corporation on Earth to stockpile massive reserves of U.S. currency just to keep their lights on. This artificial, mandatory global demand for the dollar allows the U.S. Treasury to run massive deficit spending, borrowing money at artificially low interest rates, which funds its massive military and domestic programs.
It's a huge advantage.
Massive. Furthermore, because these transactions clear through U.S.-controlled financial architecture like the SWIFT system, it grants Washington the unilateral power to financially sanction and cripple any nation on Earth by simply cutting off their access to the dollar.
But this single transaction with the Japanese ship exposes a fatal flaw in that system. The analysis argues that because Iran possesses the geographic leverage to physically choke off the Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly 20% of the world's liquid fuel passes, they can dictate the terms of engagement.
And they are using that leverage.
By forcing an allied nation to settle a debt outside the U.S. financial system, utilizing the yuan, Iran is proving in real time that the world's energy needs can be met without utilizing the dollar. They are bypassing the sanctions architecture entirely.
And the adaptation isn't merely financial either, it is physical.
Oh, right.
The analysis details how global supply chains are rapidly restructuring to circumvent the maritime choke points controlled by the conflict. Italy is cited as a prime example. They are aggressively pivoting to source its liquefied natural gas, or LNG, via overland pipeline routes from Algeria.
Wow.
They are fundamentally altering their energy infrastructure to avoid the Persian Gulf entirely.
Think of the Strait of Hormuz like the main highway into a city. If it's blocked, it's a nightmare. But if it stays blocked long enough, people find back roads. Eventually, those back roads get paved, businesses move there, and even when the main highway reopens, nobody needs it anymore. That's what's happening to the U.S. dollar right now. The world is paving the back roads.
Which brings critical context to the new framework for peace proposed by Iran, as detailed in the source material via Al Jazeera.
What are their terms now?
The Iranian terms are highly specific. They demand financial compensation for damages incurred, the total dismantling of the economic sanctions architecture, and an ironclad guarantee of U.S. non-interference in their domestic affairs.
But the analysis highlights a glaring omission from their previous list of demands. Historically, Iran's primary condition for any de-escalation was the complete physical removal of all U.S. military bases from the surrounding region. This time, that demand was dropped entirely.
And Kwiatkowski provides a highly analytical interpretation of that omission.
Let's hear it.
She posits that Iranian strategists have calculated that they no longer need to expend negotiating capital on demanding a U.S. withdrawal. Why? Because the physical realities of the conflicts are already enforcing an organic attritional retreat.
It's happening anyway.
Exactly. The relentless logistical strain and the persistent threat of localized proxy attacks are naturally compressing the U.S. footprint in locations like Iraq and Bahrain. Iran is simply analyzing the trajectory of the battle space. There's no tactical logic in negotiating for a concession that the adversary is already in the process of conceding through operational exhaustion.
Which acts as a perfect transition into what I found to be the most sobering, reality-altering segment of this entire deep dive. It shatters the myth of infinite American military capacity.
It really does.
We are conditioned to view the U.S. defense budget, which approaches $1 trillion, as a guarantee of boundless, omnipresent kinetic power. We assume the U.S. can sustain high-intensity conflict anywhere, indefinitely. But Kwiatkowski forces us to look at the cold, hard logistics.
Her assessment is rooted in supply chain physics, not political rhetoric. She argues definitively that the United States lacks the material capacity to sustain a prolonged, high-intensity aerial bombardment campaign against fortified Iranian positions.
That's a huge claim.
It is. The limitation is not a lack of resolve. It is a critical deficit in physical inventory. The complex, precision-guided munitions, the smart bombs and cruise missiles required to penetrate hardened subterranean facilities are simply not available in sufficient quantities.
And you can't just, mandate a factory to print more overnight.
No, not at all.
The analysis points out that the manufacturing pipeline for these advanced systems, sourcing the specialized solid rocket motors, the microelectronics, the high-explosive compounds, it requires a lead time ranging from 18 months to a staggering 5 years just to replace what has already been expended in recent conflicts.
It's a massive bottleneck.
The U.S. military is effectively fighting with a pantry that is rapidly emptying, with no immediate supply deliveries on the horizon.
The vulnerability extends beyond the munitions, too, to the multi-billion-dollar platforms designed to deliver them.
The aircraft carriers.
Right. The analysis introduces a deeply concerning incident involving the USS Gerald Ford, which is the newest and most advanced aircraft carrier in the U.S. fleet. The material references a severe fire that broke out aboard the vessel and reportedly burned continuously for 30 hours.
30 hours?
Yes, effectively neutralizing the ship's operational capability for that time.
Let me stop and really clarify why a 30-hour fire on an aircraft carrier is not just an accident, it's a systemic red alert. Kwiatkowski highlights a fundamental tenet of naval damage control. On a Navy ship, everyone is a fireman.
That's true, yeah.
Unlike a building on land, you cannot evacuate at sea and you cannot call the local fire department. Every single sailor, from the cook to the radar operator, is rigorously trained in advanced firefighting because a fire at sea is an immediate existential threat to the vessel and the crew.
Therefore, for a conflagration to rage unabated for 30 hours on the premier flagship of the U.S. Navy, It indicates a cascading failure of internal systems.
It has to.
Modern naval architecture heavily relies on automated damage control systems to compensate for smaller crew sizes. A fire of this duration implies either a catastrophic failure in that automated design, a profound breakdown in crew training and leadership under pressure, or potentially sophisticated internal sabotage.
Any of those options is terrifying.
Right. Regardless of the catalyst, the strategic takeaway is identical. The United States cannot reliably project the overwhelming power of a carrier strike group if its central asset can be internally crippled by localized crises.
And the administration cannot simply buy its way out of this logistical hole. The material notes that the executive branch is attempting to secure an emergency appropriation of $200 billion from Congress to sustain the broader military posture.
But that request is colliding with a massive domestic political wall.
Why?
The political friction is tied directly back to the economic realities we discussed earlier. The American electorate is exhausted by inflation and the rising cost of living.
People are tacked out.
Exactly. The analysis projects that lawmakers across the political spectrum will face insurmountable pressure from constituents who are demanding to know why $200 billion is being routed to a foreign conflict when domestic infrastructure and household budgets are buckling. The political capital required to finance a resource-intensive, open-ended war simply does not exist in the current economic climate.
Which leads the analysis to highlight proposals that border on tactical absurdity. Because the U.S. cannot sustain a prolonged air campaign due to depleted munitions, and the naval projection is compromised, there is reportedly discussion of utilizing ground forces.
Ground forces in Iran?
Yes. The source material details a theoretical operational plan to deploy approximately 2,400 U.S. Marines to seize and hold an Iranian-controlled island situated in the Strait of Hormuz.
Kwiatkowski compares the tactical logic of this proposed operation to a miniature version of Iwo Jima.
That's a grim comparison.
To understand the comparison, look at the historical precedent. In World War II, the U.S. deployed an overwhelming force of 60,000 Marines to secure Iwo Jima, suffering catastrophic casualty rates to achieve a strategic objective that historians still debate.
Right.
To insert a fraction of that force, 2,400 lightly armored Marines, into a heavily fortified, geographically isolated island surrounded by highly sophisticated Iranian anti-access and area denial missile networks. It is tactically indefensible.
It would be a slaughter.
It would result in a massive shedding of American blood for zero sustainable strategic advantage. It reads as a desperate pivot, not a viable military doctrine.
You have to wonder, if the U.S. military is acting like a maxed-out credit card right now, how does that change the way adversaries like China view the board?
If we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah, please.
the analysis explicitly notes that the administration is desperate to project an aura of unassailable strength ahead of a critical summit with Chinese President Xi Jinping. But how can you project strength with no ammo and an aircraft carrier on fire?
You can't.
Exactly. It shatters the illusion of infinite capacity. It empirically demonstrates to peer competitors that American military hegemony is bound by the rigid laws of industrial logistics and domestic economic fatigue.
And that has ripple effects.
Huge ones. And this realization that the primary guarantor of regional security is structurally constrained creates an environment of existential dread for nations relying on that security umbrella, most notably Israel.
That brings us to the multi-front reality currently straining the Israeli state to its breaking point. The analysis details how Israel is not merely bracing for an escalation with Iran, they are actively engaged in a high-intensity conflict in Lebanon.
And utilizing operational tactics mirroring those deployed in Gaza.
Right. According to the material, Israeli forces are systematically clearing civilian populations from vast tracts of southern Lebanon.
The stated strategic objective, as analyzed by Kwiatkowski, is the territorial expansion and subsequent settlement of that land to create a fortified buffer zone, while simultaneously prosecuting a deeply taxing, multi-front war of attrition.
But prosecuting a war of that magnitude requires a flawless defensive shield, and the analysis points to critical structural failures appearing within Israel's primary defense apparatus, the Iron Dome.
The material cites instances where early warning systems are failing to trigger, and the Iron Dome itself is failing to achieve the necessary interception rates against incoming projectiles.
That's causing that.
The root cause circles back to the exact same logistical nightmare plaguing the U.S., the economics of interception, and a global supply chain bottleneck. There is a critical shortage of the highly sophisticated interceptor missiles required by the system.
Let's break down the math of asymmetric warfare, because it's vital here. You are defending against rudimentary drones or unguided rockets that might cost an adversary like a few $1,000s to manufacture. To intercept them, you have to fire a highly advanced, precision-guided interceptor that costs tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars. When your adversary can mass-produce cheap offensive projectiles faster than the global supply chain can manufacture complex defensive interceptors, your shield inevitably collapses.
And the physical toll of this conflict is compounding the economic devastation. The analysis describes a severe contraction of the Israeli economy. Operating commercial enterprises within an active multi-front war zone is financially unsustainable.
Not to mention the manpower drain.
Exactly. The mobilization of hundreds of thousands of reservists rips the highly educated workforce out of the tech sector, which is the engine of the Israeli economy. The material highlights a resulting brain drain, highly skilled professionals emigrating to seek stability.
And do they come back?
Historical demographic data suggests that a significant percentage of those who leave during a protracted crisis of this nature do not return, permanently weakening the structural foundation of the state.
The source paints a picture of a country that is used to fighting wars from a safe distance against disarmed populations, suddenly finding itself as the battlefield. It's like a heavyweight boxer who has only ever shadowboxed suddenly taking a real hit to the jaw. The panic sets in. You have a nation built on the premise of impenetrable deterrence. When that deterrence fails, when the air defenses deplete, the economy bleeds, and the war expands, the structural integrity of the entire state begins to buckle.
And according to the source material, this convergence of crises is pushing Israeli leadership toward the most terrifying strategic contingency imaginable.
The nuclear option.
Yes, they are seriously analyzing the deployment of tactical nuclear weapons.
It is the ultimate escalation.
It is. Kwiatkowski's assessment is that the upper echelons of Israeli leadership, facing what they perceive as an encroaching existential threat from a deeply entrenched, heavily armed Iranian adversary, are actively calculating the threshold for utilizing nuclear weapons to permanently alter the regional balance of power.
We have to analyze the brutal, chilling logic behind this potential decision. Why would a state consider crossing the ultimate geopolitical red line, risking global pariah status?
The analysis points to the precedent set by the conventional bombing campaign in Gaza. It cites internal calculations estimating that the explosive yield dropped on Gaza using conventional munitions is roughly equivalent to 4 to 8 times the destructive force of the atomic bomb dropped on Nagasaki.
Which is just a staggering statistic.
Yeah, the strategic mindset is rooted in a grim calculus. If the military has already inflicted the aggregate destruction of multiple nuclear devices through conventional means, and the inventory of those conventional means is now critically depleted, what is the functional barrier preventing the transition to an actual nuclear device?
Wow.
This is especially relevant given the knowledge that Iran has diligently preserved a vast, highly capable arsenal of subterranean ballistic missiles explicitly designed to overwhelm Israel's rapidly depleting air defenses.
The analysis argues that the current Israeli leadership operates under a paradigm where traditional international law and diplomatic norms are viewed as secondary to absolute state survival.
It's all about survival.
If they calculate that conventional avenues are exhausted, and they perceive the United States as wavering-like, actively seeking a transactional off-ramp, they may determine that their window to permanently neutralize the Iranian threat, while theoretically still under the umbrella of U.S. geopolitical protection, is closing rapidly.
It represents the Samson option brought to the tactical level.
Explain that.
If Israeli leadership believes that Washington is preparing to abandon the alliance in pursuit of a bilateral settlement with Iran, they might view a preemptive nuclear escalation as the only mechanism to either permanently cripple their primary adversary or forcefully drag the United States back into the kinetic conflict.
Which perfectly sets up the final, incredibly pragmatic strategic concept explored in this deep dive: the architecture of a separate peace and the radical realignment of Middle Eastern alliances.
Right. As we discussed, the analysis continually reinforces that the U.S. administration is actively hunting for an exit strategy. The material points to the political groundwork already being poured to facilitate this pivot.
How are they laying the groundwork?
It highlights reports that Trump is publicly distancing himself from the architects of the aggressive posture. Specifically, he's shifting blame onto military advisors, referencing individuals dubbed Pete and Pegasus, framing them as the primary instigators pushing for an unwinnable war.
It's the standard political maneuver. You designate scapegoats to absorb the fallout, allowing the executive to radically alter the strategic course while maintaining a veneer of decisive leadership. But what does the new course actually entail? The analysis introduces the concept of a bilateral separate peace.
A separate peace, in this context, implies a scenario where the United States structurally detaches itself from the Israeli security apparatus, both in terms of financial subsidies and kinetic military guarantees,
Yeah.
in order to broker a direct transactional agreement with Iran.
Think about what a separate peace really means. If you are stuck in a terrible group project, eventually you might just negotiate directly with the teacher to save your own grade and let the rest of your group fail. Is that what we are seeing on a geopolitical scale? If you are analyzing this strictly through the lens of a transactional business arrangement, alliances are not based on shared democratic values. They are based on capital flows.
Absolutely. The analysis argues that the administration views the massive sovereign wealth of the Gulf states Saudi Arabia, the UAE, as the paramount priority.
Over Israel.
Yes. These nations invest trillions into U.S. domestic infrastructure and serve as the primary buyers of U.S. exports. Conversely, the analysis frames Israel as a massive, perpetual liability subsidized by the American taxpayer.
The calculus is ruthlessly pragmatic. If brokering a bilateral de-escalation with Iran secures the economic stability of the Gulf states, ensures the uninterrupted flow of global energy, and lowers domestic inflation for the American voter, that outcome perfectly aligns with an America First doctrine, regardless of the consequences for traditional allies.
Yeah.
And this leads to Naufal's most striking prediction regarding the aftermath of such a deal.
What's the prediction?
If the U.S. provides Iran with this diplomatic and economic off-ramp, what is the reciprocal action? The prediction is that Iran would immediately cease all proxy harassment of the U.S.-aligned Gulf states, effectively securing the immediate neighborhood.
That sounds great for the U.S.
But they do not demobilize. Instead, they pivot their vast, largely untouched arsenal of ballistic missiles and drone swarms and focus the entirety of their military apparatus directly onto Israel.
The strategic implications are profound. By stepping back and securing the Gulf, the U.S. effectively isolates Israel. Israel would then be forced to absorb the undivided, concentrated kinetic output of the Iranian military without the logistical or diplomatic shield of the United States.
They'd be alone.
They would be forced into a binary choice: capitulate and sue for peace on Iranian terms, or escalate to the terrifying nuclear threshold we analyzed moments ago.
This raises an important question, though. Is it realistic to believe the U.S. would completely pivot its allegiance toward a state it has treated as a primary adversary for decades?
This sounds impossible.
The material points out that we only have to look back a few decades to see that this level of extreme pragmatism is historically grounded.
Oh, right, before 1979.
Exactly. The analysis reminds us that prior to the 1979 revolution, the United States and Iran were deeply integrated strategic allies and robust economic partners. The alignment was based entirely on mutual security and economic benefit, superseding deep cultural or ideological differences.
Kwiatkowski actually shares a vivid personal anecdote to illustrate this. She describes attending Clemson University in South Carolina just prior to the hostage crisis and notes the massive influx of Iranian engineering and technical students integrated into the American university system.
They were everywhere.
The two societies were deeply intertwined because the state-level architecture demanded it.
The overarching theory presented in the source material is that a return to a highly profitable, strictly transactional relationship with Iran is immensely appealing to the current U.S. strategic mindset.
It makes a twisted kind of sense.
If the ultimate long-term objective is stabilizing the global economy and marshaling resources for a broader competition with China, forging a pragmatic, functional partnership with the power that physically controls the Strait of Hormuz is the most logical move on the board. In this paradigm, alliances are temporary. Interests are permanent.
It is an absolute recalibration of the global order, and it brings us full circle. We set out to decipher the mechanics of this real-time geopolitical thriller. We've navigated the deliberate contradictions of shadow diplomacy and the deployment of real estate executives to negotiate nuclear treaties.
We've analyzed the internal fractures of the Iranian state and the terrifying reality of allied intelligence agencies hunting each other's diplomatic contacts.
We examined the profound shift from the kinetic to the financial battlefield, dissecting the existential threat to the petrodollar, symbolized by allied nations utilizing the Chinese yuan to bypass U.S. sanctions.
We deconstructed the logistical reality of American military limits, exposing the fragile supply chains of precision munitions and the systemic vulnerabilities of automated aircraft carriers.
We confronted the crushing multi-front attrition, slowly dismantling the Israeli economy and defense grid, pushing the region toward the unthinkable threshold of tactical nuclear deployment. And ultimately, we mapped out the brutal transactional logic of a separate peace that prioritizes capital flow over historical alliances.
The sheer density of the variables at play highlights a global system that is structurally fatigued, where traditional doctrines of deterrence are failing to contain emerging asymmetrical realities.
It really is. And I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought that expands on the mechanics we've explored today. If the global supply chain successfully adapts to a paralyzed Strait of Hormuz by physically paving new overland energy routes, and if nations, driven by necessity, begin routinely settling massive sovereign debts utilizing currencies outside the U.S. banking architecture, we are witnessing a quiet, irreversible revolution.
A total paradigm shift.
We always assume global power is determined by who has the most aircraft carriers and ballistic missiles. But what if the future of global dominance doesn't belong to the country with the biggest bombs, but to the country that controls the economic bypass routes when the bombs start falling? It's something to keep in mind the next time you fill up your gas tank. Thank you for joining us on this custom deep dive, and encourage you to keep questioning the headlines.